This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
Roddy, there he is, looking sharp with his Houston Cougars shirt. I thought you were going to have like a Georgia Bulldog shirt today.
No. I got a lot of Georgia Bulldog fans who I'm friends with who are have no voice this morning. But
Good
no,
for them,
no.
though. Good for them. They stopped choking. I mean, that was
Finally, so many years they finally got over the hump.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. Since Herschel Walker, it's like it's a long ass time ago that they had that success. So Kirby, and I thought Saban handled it with a lot of class too. I thought
he did.
was very
saying you kicked your ass in the fourth quarter, and he had a smile at the end of his face. I think it's a prideful thing probably for him, because you look at it and see one of your proteges. If I'm gonna get beat, I'm at least get beat by one of my guys.
Right, exactly. And it's just, and listen, in the end, all those SEC dudes are all the same. So they, the league also is super happy because, both their teams were in there and they were going to win either way. It didn't matter what team won, the SEC was going to win. So it was actually a good thing for the entire conference. All right. So Cam, you wake up yesterday morning, the news breaks, and what goes through your mind?
Shocked. It's funny because I got to give you credit though. We talk about it on this show. You had been calling for Flo in his job, and you thought that was realistic. I didn't think it was realistic. So you were right on this one. But I'll tell you what, Flo was just as shocked. I talked to people close to him, and he did not see this coming. He didn't view this as like a realistic possibility, losing, winning 8 of your last 9.
I apologize, but I keep thinking none of us get to talk to Greer and Flo. Well, Flo never got to talk to Greer either, and that's how come he never even knew either.
Yeah, there definitely was a disconnect there, and I've learned more in the last day than I knew about that situation. But it's interesting because they're like two opposite personalities. Flores is this, very aggressive, assertive, abrasive at times guy, and Chris is passive. He's kind of a natural good guy, doesn't really make anybody upset, but also doesn't really speak up a lot. So they're completely different personalities. So to kind of see this being boiled down as a Greer versus Flores deal is interesting to me. I don't know if that's the full story. I think there's more elements to it than that. I know there's more elements to it than that.
Well, you were probably listening right before we came on. I mean, he had issues with Kenny Stills. He had issues with Minkah Fitzpatrick, which put the front office in a terrible position because they were forced to trade a young Pro Bowl type safety. Luckily, they were good enough to draft another Pro Bowl type safety to replace him. So that kind of worked out in the end, but still you were forced to trade him, which then you lose leverage in the process of all of that. You're not going to be able to maximize, that trade in all of that. But there were, obviously the 7 different changes with their coaching staffs on offensive line and offensive coordinators. All this there was so much turnover throughout the first 3 years that the issues were a lot deeper than just Chris Greer, clearly. And that's why I compared him to Joe Philbin and to Adam Gase and to Randy Shannon with the Canes. Maybe they're all different in their personalities, but they all struggled to get along with human beings.
I said this yesterday on NFL Network on air, and I actually had a player reach out to me this morning and was like, "You're right on point." There was a vibe in that locker room that if you did wrong, essentially, Flores would yell at you. He'd get on you hard. It'd be that. If you did right, he'd not really talk to you. Probably leave you alone. He's a tough love, and he only coached the guys he felt like it needed, like really coached hard the guys who needed it. So there was a lot of feel where some players like that. Some players like the hard coaching if they were struggling. Leave me alone if I'm doing well. But there's a lot of players who like, man, tell me if I'm doing something right. Give me encouragement. And that was an element that's missing for him. So I think that the Dolphins felt like they need somebody who could be a little bit more of a people person, a little bit more somebody who can interact with players and have a relationship with them that's beyond just that element. So
you got kids?
I do. I have a daughter.
How old is she?
15 months.
Oh, okay. Well, it's too young still.
Yeah,
but I mean, like when she gets older, so you just gonna rip her when she does things wrong, or you're gonna give her a hug when she does something right, and when she brings
I'm gonna encourage her.
You're gonna give her a high five. You're gonna
but,
give her some
but here's the
love,
thing,
right?
yeah,
That's my
here's the
point.
thing. Right. No, I think you're absolutely right about that. And I'm a different person than Flo. Flo's a lot more, abrasive, like I said, than I am. But
No, but listen, I'm a tough dude. Also, I mean, ask
right,
Sean. He's worked with me at several places where I had to run things, and I'm a hard ass.
right,
Now I'm the first guy to tell you, hey man, great work. That's awesome. I really
right,
appreciate it. Thank you. But I'm also a hard ass too. You know what I mean? Because I work hard. So if I
yeah,
work hard, I expect your ass to work hard too. You know what I
right,
mean? So I'm gonna be a tough son of a bitch to work for. You know what I mean? Sean knows it. But I am also an encouraging person too at the same time, because there has to be both. I was tough on my daughter, but at the same time, I couldn't give her enough hugs in a day and kiss her and tell her that I love her and
right.
send her a text or whatever, because it has to be a bit of both. It's not that you have to do it, but it's just kind of part of the process of anything in raising anything. Like I was saying yesterday, you go ahead and adopt a dog and just feed it and throw it in a corner and never love it and never give it attention. How do you think that dog's going to grow up? Now
Yeah.
you give it love, you give it attention, it's going to be a completely different dog around you. You know what I mean? So that's kind of part of what it is. And he struggled with that.
Yeah, I think that hopefully he knows this. Like I think Flo's going to get another opportunity, whether it's a head coach or DC this period. Like he's too good of a defensive coach for him not to get another opportunity immediately. Like regardless of what you thought of Flo, their defense has been really strong over the
Yeah.
last couple of years,
Yeah.
and he's found ways in his own way to motivate guys in the second half of the season. So he clearly has some traits that have translated well. That he's a good coach. I think that you're going to look at him, and where I think he needs to grow is what we talked about, knowing that this is particularly a different era of coaches, because, maybe in the 60s or 70s, you could get away and not really care about, somebody's feelings or, how this is perceived or what the impact is. But now, especially with social media, and I don't want to say this era has got softer, but it's an era where you have to appease feelings. It's a part of the job. And I think that's something that Flo has to work on. And I know he knows that. Whether he does it, whether he has the capacity to change, I don't know that. He might not. It might just be who he is, and
Right.
For better or for worse, you're getting it. But I know he's interviewing for a Bears job today. I know if he probably has another interview, he'll probably get another interview or two. So it's going to be different opportunities for him. That's the one element he has to fix. But my big thing with you, Big O, and I want to ask you this because you have been for a while on the Fire Flow train.
Hell yeah.
My deal was, do you fire a coach because he does not get along with others? So for me, I fire coaches for football reasons. I fire coaches because you're not winning enough games. I fire coaches because the overarching feel I've got is that Flo was fired mostly because he did not get along with others, particularly the most important others, the GM, the owner, the quarterback.
Oh, no, but there's a domino effect. I just told you with Minka. You think that's not a problem?
No, Minka and Kenny Stills.
That was a problem for the front office, dude. You
Right.
put them in a terrible position, and then they made up for it. You know what I'm saying? And then they got you Fitzpatrick.
Right.
And
right.
yet
No, I'm with you on that.
And then you're disruptive, and you want Brissett.
Right. And I'll actually tell you a story.
You don't play Matt Collins. And Mike Gesicki's on the sidelines.
No, I hear you on that. These are all things that are.
I'm giving you football. No, I'm giving you. No, I'm giving you
me football. But I'm telling you this, Big O. That's not why he was fired. He wasn't fired because Matt Collins didn't play enough on the field.
No, but I'm telling you, that's icing on the cake. That's like.
But I'm telling you why. I'm telling you why. I know why. And to me, that's not a reason. That's not a good enough reason for me.
But don't kid yourself on this.
Right.
Besides not getting along with people, he screwed up all over the place.
Right.
Okay. He's the one that wanted Kyle Van Noy and then wanted to kick him out.
Right.
Because Kyle Van Noy had an opinion, and he doesn't want people with opinions around.
Yeah,
he doesn't want Kenny Stills with an opinion around.
Kyle Van Noy was a bad signing from the jump.
Whatever it was, but that was his signing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
This guy.
Oh, absolutely.
And they signed him. They appeased him. And then he turns around and screws the GM by saying, now you got to cut him. So now the GM takes the cap hit. The GM brings in Eric Flowers because he needs him. Now he kicks Eric Flowers out. No, we'll go with young guys. So what do you want, Austin Jackson left guard, or do you want Eric Flowers? you would have been better off with Eric Flowers.
Mm-hmm.
He made a lot of stupid football decisions along
Mm-hmm.
the way. In the Tennessee game, you got to use Duke Johnson more, dude.
Right.
You're in a rain game with a quarterback that doesn't have a gun for an arm, so you need to run the ball. The kid had 7 for 49. He was sandwiched between 2 100-yard games. You could have had a third one. I don't know if you win that game, but maybe you make it more of a game with it. I can just go over more and more football things that I'm telling you, Cam, besides being a first-class a-hole, they looked around and said, we're not in the playoffs because this idiot made this, and this decision. This is why we ended up losing these games. And that's the problem that they look above. It's not just that. He meddled with the football decisions. And watch the next coach. He will not have the power that Gase and Flo had with personnel. That will change. I promise you that.
So
that will change.
I agree with you on a lot of those things. My thing is that, like, Flo, who he is today, he was the same guy when they hired him 3 years ago. He's not got worse. He's not changed. He was the same a-hole, if you want to call him that, abrasive dude, difficult to work with. These were all things that were a part of him. The tough love, only talk to you when you're doing good or doing bad and need to be coached up. Now when you're doing, these are all elements that were there year one, year two. And these are things that after the season, Ross would praise and say that he felt like it was on the right track. So there's the whole idea that all of a sudden in year three, he started becoming difficult for everyone is not.
I think it was difficult all along the way. They just mask it and hope that it gets better, but it never got better. And that was the problem with it, because I'm sure the conversation was had with him. Hey, you're not going to turn into Josh McDaniels or Matt Patricia, are you?
Right.
Oh no, I'm not one of those guys. Well, he turned in, but I
think he was.
I think I used that line with you and everything.
I don't think he was as drastic as Josh McDaniels or Matt Patricia, because I know a lot of guys in that locker room, and there were people who didn't like him. Certainly, there were players who didn't like his heavy-handed approach, the way he would treat them, the way he would speak to them. And I think Tua was among that group. I think that Tua was definitely, kind of souring on Flo and his personality. But there was also a lot of guys who loved that, being coached like that, particularly on the defense side of the ball. So I think he had a lot of fans in that locker room. So it wasn't like everyone hated him. But I like I said, I do think that it's a different era. Whether it's the toughness factor or whatnot, I think that he was a lot too harsh for people. And I think it did lean into his football decisions. You talked about it. 4 different O-line coaches, 3 different OCs. Some of that,
and there's no hope that he was going to fix it.
Right.
That's insanity.
And from what I understand,
that's the insanity part. When I would ask any media member or a fan and say, "Oh, bring back Flo," and I go, "Well, why would you bring him back? What would make you think he's going to fix the offense?"
Yeah,
and that's where everybody would then go like this, because you didn't have an answer, because there's no track record.
And that's one of his biggest failures as his first time as a head coach, in my opinion. You got to figure out who your guy is. And I think some of that, like they talk about, like the Dolphins have put out the relationship and personality, that sort of thing. The one thing about relationships is that you have to be able to know people, know the right people to be able to hire these positions. I do think that was a weakness of Flo, being able to know the right OCs, the right O-line coaches, the right guys that you need. You
want my theory on that?
And trust.
You want the theory on that?
Yeah. What's your theory?
Never, ever hire a coach that's been stuck in one place. They hired Philbin, stuck in Green Bay his whole life. They hired Flo, stuck his whole life.
Right.
The funny part is, Cam, I always have fans tell me, well, why'd they hire that guy? I mean, that guy's been like in 8 places. He's always getting fired. And I always tell people he's been in 8 places because he's a really good coach. He got fired because it's the situation that got everybody fired, but it's not that person. You want the coach like a Dable. You want the coach that's bounced around and coached all over, because when he's coached all over, he's coached with all kinds of coaches, all kinds of systems. He's met all kinds of different coaches on the other side of the ball, offense, defense, special teams, and he builds a Rolodex that way. The guy stuck in one place, like Philbin, like Flores, rarely they can take coaches with them. And they have no Rolodex because they've only worked in one place, and the only people they really truly know are the people they've worked with in that spot. So it's a very limited thing. So that's
So
why you see them go to the same well over and over again, because unlike the guy that's been fired and bounced around and been a head coach here, an offensive coordinator there, a running backs coach here, wide receiver there, all this, that guy's got a fat ass Rolodex because he has met everybody and has more chances to build a staff.
no, I think
Crazy.
a lot of that's real. I think a lot of that's real. I think Flo did have a difficult time finding the right guys in those
Just
particular
like
positions.
Philbin.
Yeah,
Just
and
like
so
Philbin.
so if there was a big criticism, my biggest criticism of Flo, it would be those two things: the fact that he had trouble hiring the offensive positions that mattered, and the offense ultimately was the bigger struggle point, and that when chaotic situations may have arose, I don't know if he handled them the best way. We talk about Kenny Stills' situation that I know very well, you know, how he handled that. Minkah Fitzpatrick wanting him to play a position that Minkah didn't feel comfortable with, not figuring out a way to work that out. And then Tua this year throughout the year with the Deshaun situation, they had a little disagreement in the Baltimore game about his injury, and Tua thought he was healthy enough to play. Flo didn't. Flo ended up
Flo never believed in the kid. That's
exactly.
ultimately that was the problem.
So
Because if you have a negative attitude already with the kid, you are never going to be supportive of him in the process. So it's hard
So
to
I
succeed.
do.
That's like telling your kid every day, you're a disaster. You'll never turn into anything. You'll never turn into anything. You'll never turn into anything. And eventually that may end up happening.
So I don't know that I would say he never believed in Tua. He was a part. Like if you're gonna hear, you've heard this throughout the years about who wanted who. From what I understand, Greer, Ross, Flo were all on the same board to
No,
draft Tua.
no, no,
Maybe we heard different things
no.
though. I
Yeah,
heard they all wanted Burrow initially,
yeah,
and then
yes,
when
yes,
Burrow
yes.
was not available, all three wanted Tua.
No,
And so
no, no,
that's what I said. Maybe
no,
we heard different things. Maybe we
no,
heard different
no.
things.
I'll put my life on it.
Okay.
No,
That's what
no.
I'm saying. Like it's fine.
I
We hear
know,
different,
I know what Flo wanted.
right? That's something we can hear different things from different people, but I also know people try to change narratives once things become a little bit more clear.
I
So
know for a fact what
that's
Flo
what I'm
wanted.
saying.
I'm just
I
saying.
hear you. I hear you.
I'm just
But I
saying.
guess my big thing, if I could change it a little bit. We talked a lot about Flo, and obviously Flo's gone from the Dolphins. He's going to land somewhere else, but I don't know if I feel great today if I'm a Dolphins fan.
I do. I feel great.
I know you feel great. So let me tell you
I
why.
think this gives you a
Let,
chance to move ahead. Look,
let,
the difference.
let me tell you
Go ahead.
my concerns real quick.
Go ahead.
So fourth head coach since 2015.
Mhm.
It feels like a never-ending cycle.
Right.
Every single time, stop and start with a new idea, a new philosophy, a new way to make it different, a new way to get out of mediocrity. And
Right.
it's 2 decades. And so why would I have any confidence that Steve Ross is going to hire the right guy this time to be able to make it different?
Right.
I have no confidence.
Right.
So you're firing Coach from Flores, and this guy isn't Vince Lombardi. Like I think that Flo deserved another year, but let's be real. This guy was 24, 25, had missed the playoffs 3 straight years. So this hasn't been a situation where this guy was a rock star. But I thought that he showed enough as a good coach. To me, Flores wasn't the biggest issue on this team. To me, they had a lot of bigger issues. But beyond that, the Dolphins now go into an offseason, and whether you're a Tua guy or a Watson guy, you're going to be looked at in a situation where you've now gone through 3 head coaches over the last 6 or 7 years. You're going to have to try to find a new head coach, and you're keeping your GM, who I know you're a fan of Chris Greer, and I'm not trying to get everybody fired, but I was shocked that Chris Greer survived and Flores didn't, given that look at Greer's draft record. We had one really good draft in 2021, but 2020 was very rough, and he hasn't had a history of drafting the most important position, offensive line and quarterback, consistently. Jury's still out on Tua. Maybe he's the guy, maybe he's not. But those 2 positions have defined a team. So now you're going to try to hire a new head coach where you're saying Chris Greer is going to have all this power. How are you going to hire the rock star head coach you have when you already have a GM that may or may not be somebody that candidates like? I just don't see a clear direction for this Dolphins team. And I was told by somebody yesterday, we think we're close. I am tired of hearing that
No,
the
I know
Dolphins
that.
are
I know
close.
that. I
I'm
know that.
tired. I'm tired.
I'm not-
There's this my mindset, and I don't know if it's a Steve Ross deal or otherwise. There's a mindset that we're a lot better and we're a lot more talented and we're a lot closer than we truly are. And I heard it when Steve Ross was explaining the thing. He's talking about this young, excellent, talented roster. Where? There's some talent here, but I don't see a young, excellent, talented roster just waiting to be exposed, and all of a sudden Flores is just screwing this up and not maximizing every player. No, there's huge holes on this team that need to be fixed, and a lot of these are front office personnel decisions. So I don't have any confidence right now that Dolphins are going to be in a better spot a year, 2, 3 years from now, and a lot of that starts with Stephen Ross to me.
I get you, and I understand what you're feeling, and as a person that's actually lived this whole thing throughout, first of all, does it make sense to hang on to Philbin for another year? Does it make sense to hang on to Sperano for another year? Does it make sense to hang on to Gase for another year? If you don't think it's the right person, you pull the trigger. The Dolphins were going to be criticized whether they pulled the trigger early or if they stuck with Flo one more year, they fall short, and then they end up firing everybody. And in the end, Chris Greer, Marvin Allen, and Reggie McKenzie know that if they didn't fire him now, next year he was going to take all of them down at the same time. Okay. And as for, I watched Sam Madison and Pat Surtain and Jason Taylor and Zach Thomas and Tim Bowens get old before my eyes because Dave Wanstead could not figure out the offense. I watched Cam Wake and Jones and Soliai and Randy Starks and different players that they had after that wave, and they were pretty good defensive players, and they got old. And poor Cam Wake never really saw good Dolphin football in the postseason like he deserved, too.
Right.
So it's a catch-22 that if you don't think you have the guy, well, you're better off tearing off the scab and moving on. And so that's why I have no problem moving on in this sense. Now, as for personnel,
if you're taking off the scab, why not take off the whole scab? If you feel like it's not
because I don't believe the personnel part. That's what I'm about to answer. Okay. I don't believe the personnel part. I think Stephen Ross knows.
So you feel like the roster is good enough to continue. You feel like this roster is good enough to be a contender already.
No, because they need a couple of offensive linemen, experienced ones, and a real offensive coordinator, a real offensive coach, and a real quarterbacks coach, something they failed to have on this team. And those three things would already change. If you had those three coaches this year, you're in the playoffs.
Right.
This year, you're in the playoffs.
So that's Steve Ross' take. Your take is Steve Ross's take, and I disagree. But if that's your take, that's your take. Your take is that we're better coaching.
Let me finish.
Your take is we're better coaching this year. The Dolphins would have been significantly better.
Easily, they would have been. They would have been not doing. They wouldn't have done anything in the playoffs, but they would have snuck in at least. Okay, they would have at least snuck in. That's my thing. But here's where I disagree with you on the personnel side. So you're hitting on Jalen Phillips, and you're hitting on Javon Holland, and you're hitting on Brandon Jones, and you're hitting on Raekwon Davis, and you're hitting on Kyle Van Ginkel, and you're hitting on Phillips, and you're hitting on Waddle, and you're hitting a whole bunch of guys, right? The only two guys that aren't working right now, they don't play, Hunter and Iggy. So we really don't know whether they can play or they can't play because they haven't had an opportunity.
I can tell you on Iggy.
You've only on 2 games?
I've seen enough.
2 games. Wow.
I've seen 2 years.
No, you have not seen
practice every day.
The practice and that none of that makes anything, bro.
There's a reason.
Got to get out in a game and get a real.
There's a reason why they bent to Xavier Howard and paid him his money, the additional money, breaking precedent on something they didn't want to do, because they knew they would be a disaster without him.
Oh, you mean this past year?
Yes.
No, that was a flow thing, my brother. That's why they paid him.
They knew what happened. If you get rid of X and you have Noah starting opposite Byron Jones, this defense would have been a large, significant amount worse.
What do you think is going to happen this offseason?
I don't know. It's going to be interesting because X is going to want some more money again.
No, X is gone.
And this defense is going to go from good to below average just by that one move.
Well, you got to make the move. The knee is only a matter of time. You can't have that many scopes.
X covers a lot of
You know what I mean?
holes on this
No,
defense.
I get that.
Like
I get
more
that.
than people don't realize, X is by far the most important and valuable player on that team.
Right now, his value couldn't be higher. They're going to dump him now, and they're going to play Noah next year. They're going to find out if he can play, and they'll probably sign a veteran as an insurance policy just in case. And that's probably what will happen. But they're going to have to move on from one of those two guys. And I would bet that it would be X, because eventually that knee is going to give out and you don't know when. Plus, he's going to ask for money. But my point is on all of this, if you're hitting on all of these picks, and then now all of a sudden you say the offensive line, okay, and Hunt actually has looked all right with terrible coaching. I think if you get real coaching, 2 or 3 of these guys end up becoming good players. So then the personnel department really isn't that bad as people are making it out, because if you're hitting on all the picks, pretty much, and we haven't found out about Noah or Hunter, and the offensive line struggles because of coaching, that's not really personnel. Plus, Stephen Ross knows exactly the things that Flores wanted to do and alter in the draft or in free agency.
That's true.
So that's why he's also gone, because a lot of the moves that he meddled with are the ones that screwed the team over, i.e. Flowers, i.e. Van Noy, i.e. the safety Cousins that you could have kept at least for the transition early on for Holland that would have helped you out. But these guys that have opinions are not good for flow. And so I think there were several decisions that went on that I think he meddled in, and it wasn't just that the personality, it's also part of the personnel. And I think that's why I'm telling you that the next guy, I believe, will not have the same kind of personnel power.
Gotcha. I'll leave you with this though. We talk about personnel, and like I said, we have different views on the personnel, but I know some people in the league have a view of this situation. And I mentioned this on the air yesterday, but I talked to a personnel executive from another team, and I told him the reasonings that Ross gave, the ones we just talked about, the fact that he feels like we believe in the talent in the roster more than we believe in the coaches. And he laughed at me. He said, look at that offensive line. Look at the way they've kind of produced. That's the reason why they're not in the playoffs. That's poor drafting. That's poor drafting, not poor coaching. That was his view. One person's view.
That's fine.
And so, like I said, I have a view. Clearly, Steve Ross, who makes all the decisions, his view is the one that matters in this case.
Yeah, true.
But there are people in the league who are looking at this and saying the reason why the Dolphins aren't where they are is more of a personnel issue than a coaching issue.
By the way, who do you think decided on 4 young linemen and a journeyman to start the offensive line? Do you think that was the personnel? Do you think, who else? Do you think that was the personnel department?
There was no other talent on that roster. Like who else was a competent starter?
He had Flowers. He could have added Flowers to the left guard.
I'll be real with you. Flowers was not a very good player. Like they made a mistake in signing him, but he was not a very good player.
But he's better than Austin Jackson by miles, right?
Because you should have drafted the better player.
And not that I even go with their grades, but wasn't he like top 20 in PFF for guards?
What, this past year? Not when he was in Miami. Not when he was in Miami.
I'm talking about this. Hey, listen, just because they can't coach here in Miami, my brother, you're stuck here with this thing. He played better in Washington because they have better coaches.
Washington does have a really good O-line coach, but that's the only place he's succeeded. Eric Flowers went to the Giants and failed. The next time he came here, didn't play well. And so, yes, Washington's the perfect home for him, and he can't play anywhere else outside of there.
So next time you talk to that GM, you tell him, so better coaching wouldn't make a difference?
Maybe it does. Maybe better O-line coaching does. Right. I told you, I don't disagree with that. I think they can be improved on the OC, the O-line position. My thing is that I do not believe that roster is as talented as you and Steve Ross think it is.
Well, I know it's talented enough to at least get in the playoffs. You should have beaten a couple of teams in that you lost to this year if you had a real coaching staff. That's the way I look at it, personally, for me. You don't think you could have won the Jacksonville game?
Oh, yeah. Those were awful losses. Those were awful losses. And Flores was absolutely outcoached in Jacksonville by Urban Meyer. So I don't disagree with that.
So then how the hell are we saying personnel when the coaching sucks, dude?
Because
we can't have them both ways, Cam.
Right? But also you got to call it both ways too. You talk about their bad losses. They won games over the second half of the year they shouldn't have won. They were not as much of a talented team. They were not more talented than Baltimore. They outcoached Baltimore. Yeah. They outcoached Baltimore. They won a game they shouldn't have won. Would an average coaching staff would have lost that game in Baltimore? So we can talk about the game. We can talk about the games they shouldn't have lost, but they out-schemed Lamar Miller and they broke him that day, and they ended up winning that game. So most coaches do not do that. So you got to call it both ways, though. So they lost games they should have won, but they also won games they should have lost.
Yeah, well, that happens to every team every year, that they win a game or two that they're not supposed to win. But on the Lamar Jackson side, I'm the different guy to talk to. You know what I mean? Lamar Jackson, to me, you stop his run, you stop him. I don't fear.
But you got to admit,
I've never feared his arm in my life. I would never fear his arm because he doesn't have the accuracy. He'll never be a great passer. So if you force him to try to beat you with his arm, you'll beat Baltimore every single time. That's why he falls short in the playoffs. Because eventually
he was killing it going into that game. He was the MVP candidate. He was torching everyone up until he ran into the Dolphins that day.
I don't think he's had a great year this year, right?
No, that's what I'm saying. He's been hurt the second half of the year, but he was playing great up until that game. That game really derailed his whole season.
Yeah. Well, they all you got to do is confuse the kid, and he'll struggle with that. All right. So, what do you think happens? Does this coaching change happen quickly? Because I think it will happen in the next 2 weeks before the Senior Bowl. Do you think that?
I do think they have to compete with some other teams, so I think they'll expedite it. I do think it'll happen before the Senior Bowl.
What kind of coach?
I think they're going to go with somebody who is definitely more of a people person. I think you'll see somebody who probably doesn't have as strong of a personality. I think you're going to see a guy who maybe I know there's been some names thrown around. Brian Daboll is a guy they've been talking about interviewing. He coached Tua in Alabama his freshman year. Byron Leftwich is another guy out there in Tampa who, I definitely think they're going to lean. They say they're going to have an open-minded coach, but I definitely think they're going to lean on the offensive side of the ball. Teams typically do the opposite of what they just had. So you had a defensive, very strong personality guy. I think they're going to have a mild-mannered offensive guy going forward. So a Brian Daboll, a Byron Leftwich, maybe even a Jim Caldwell, a Doug Peterson.
That's my guy.
Guys like that who have, are mild-mannered. All those guys are quarter guys. I think they go with one of those guys and try to make this work.
I'm going with Caldwell because he's got the experience and can build a staff.
Right.
And I think that's really, really, really important. And he's a guy that probably can groom somebody to take over for him a few years later. So,
and he's definitely a mild-mannered guy who would lead. So that's
super classy guy, man. He's a pleasure to deal with.
He's a good dude. He's a good dude, good coach. Won a lot in Detroit and didn't get as much credit as he should have.
He needs a 5,000-foot statue in Detroit. He had 3 winning seasons in Detroit, 2 of them in playoffs. And then they hired some guy with a bird's nest in his face to replace him. Jesus Christ.
Man.
My God.
Yeah, if you gave me a choice, I'd imagine it's one of those 4 guys that end up getting the gig.
Joe Flacco, 11 touchdowns, no interceptions. Jim Caldwell.
Jim Caldwell is a great coach. Coach Peyton Manning.
Hell of a coach.
Coach Peyton Manning. So I don't know if they go that way, but I think they go, like I said, somebody mild-mannered offensive coach.
He even designed Suck for Luck with Curtis Painter. It's a beautiful thing. All right. Anyway, follow him on Twitter at Cameron Wolfe. Catch his work at the NFL Network. Cam, thank you, my brother. Appreciate you.
Appreciate you.
You got it. All right. We wrap it up with Cam, Manny Navarro, and our Canes Wear Miami Hurricanes report next.
This has been
This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.